What's up, everyone? Welcome to Let Loose, the podcast dedicated to all things Gym Leader Challenge. And as always, we've got another awesome co-host back for the third or fourth. I can't even remember anymore. We got Z-Man. Zach, what's up, my friend?
Hey, what's up? It's my third time. Maybe we count it as 2.5. I just have a pancake. I have no waffles with me this time.
We are sad. We miss Ray. You know, to be honest, we haven't talked in a while. I've jumped into a couple of your streams here and there, but we've both been busy. You know, I feel like it's been a while since we talked. I feel like the last time we talked, and you mentioned it while we were kind of getting our warm up going on here, was when we talked about some brewing with fighting. Like that was like the last Discord message we sent each other, and so here we are talking about some cool things today. But Zach, checking in, dude. What's up with you?
Yeah, well, it turns out 2 kids under 2, extremely busy, which is not meant to be an excuse, but it has been the reality. So our youngest turned 5 months. Our oldest is 19 months. He was a little bit delayed, but he's running around, so that's been a lot of fun. Hanging out with him is great. He likes hiking. He likes music. He's been playing on this drum set I have down here in our studio. He's obsessed with fish, so we have a fish tank now. We've just been running around, but it's just been good. And it feels like fall here in Baltimore. We had, some heat waves of a couple weeks of 100 degrees or so. Today is 70 degrees. I had a chance to go for a nice run. I played in my locals today. We were talking about this beforehand, but I played a fighting knackle with Okie Dokie list inspired by yourself because, sometimes, and we'll go into this, I say, let me ask the experts. I'm not a fighting expert. Jeff is. Jeff, I have a psychic meta. What is the best list into this? And then I can't help but tinker around a little bit. But from the last 3 days, I'm 5-1 with the list. I hit 2 psychics today, and I went 1-1 into those. I had to go against a turn 2 Gotharita. So they did Read the Stars, which is the Gotharita ability, and put my Professor's Research on the bottom of my deck. And then attacked with Gotharita, which discards a card from my hand, discarding my Karinas, leaving me with a rare candy, a Professor's Letter, and essentially a loss.
I mean, that sounds rough. I mean, Psychic by itself is tough, and then you add a controlling element to it where you're controlling the top deck of fighting. That's a type that just is so often needing that one card, like that one lucky draw. The heart of the cards, I know you're a Yu-Gi-Oh person yourself, but you just need that top deck, and you can't get it in fighting. Things go
when
bad.
They control your top deck for you, it's just so rude. I survived the turn 1 Marshadow. I had the Karina off the turn 1 Marshadow, but then the Gotharita said no.
you don't get fun cards against Psychic, unfortunately. But we were also talking about it. Marshadow might even not be our biggest problem anymore. That's an episode for another day. So
that's right.
It's good to know that, like, instead of getting rid of cards to the format, if you just add more toxic cards, like we accept the reality that was. That's kind of how I feel. Feel like Snorlax felt like really dominant for a while, and then all of a sudden, like, things kind of shifted. Okie Dokie came out. We're all like, you know what, Snorlax, you're fine, and now we can focus on our hate somewhere else. But speaking to your cool metas and seeing kind of all the cool lists that are playing up in Baltimore, I feel like Gym Leader Challenge is in a really, really good place right now. A lot of the matchups that I have are super fun. I've been doing on my spread game. I've been really back into spread these last couple weeks, and it's just been a hoot just playing things that I love. Again, like there was a while where I was just kind of trying to be like spicy and do all these weird things, but just getting back to the basics, not just the basics, but the basics for me, and having a lot of fun with it. And, being able to play my spread decks against different things. And last night we had the Twin Leaf tournament, the Twin Leaf test tournament, and I played my Lightning spread deck, which I've been just loving. And I ran into 2 Caparaja, the new Caparaja card with Stadium Lock, and they just play Rough Seas or whatever their Crystal Cave, I think is the version. Yeah, Crystal Cave, and then Full Metal, which reduces damage by 30, and then they have that Caparaja out, and you're just like, all right, GG's metal. I mean, what am I gonna do? So that was
it's funny. My friend DJ Backwards was in that one. We were cooking up the list, and we specifically put Crystal Cave and Parallel City as the 2 disruptive ones that can stick. So I'm like, half of our meta is spread here in Baltimore. Like the first podcast you talked about, hey, Zach, you should really run Bench Bear. I'm like, nah, no, you're right, run Bench Bear. But yeah, having something like Crystal Cave and a type with like metal that doesn't have bench barrier is just so nice to be able to say, if I stick this for 2 turns, I'd probably come back.
Well, metal has bench barrier. It's just a Bronzon.
Wrong song. Yeah, you got me there. You know what's funny is the nerd part of my brain was like, well, hold on, they do. They just can't actually afford to run it.
Right. Speaking on the Bronzon too, last night in the Twin Leaf tournament, I played against the two different Bronzons that Ducey play, the Metal Transfer one and then the Metal Lynx one. And it was fun to see kind of how both lifts were kind of do different things. So, I'm excited to try that Caparaja out. It destroys spread. There was nothing I could do last night. So if your meta is full of spread, try that Caparaja. Was DJ Backwards was playing fighting last night, right? If I'm not mistaken.
No, he was playing the metal.
Oh, was he playing the metal list? Okay. That's right. He went down
so.
Zamazenta. I think I remember him. Zamazenta kind of carried a little bit of weight there at the end to finish off. I think fighting was the other deck in that matchup. So
that's right.
There's a lot of bugs in that game, so it felt a little bit weird. But it's a test tournament, so I was happy that we got some of those bugs out for the Twin Leaf people out there, which we'll be having Joe from Twin Leaf on at some point to talk to us about Gym Leader Challenge on an online client, which I'm really excited about. So something to look forward to. Right. Oh gosh. Can't tell you. I'm sure I've alluded to this before, but it's so nice to just like come to my computer, click up the stream, and then be a head in a box while I'm playing the game for a bit instead of doing like all the setup that you have to do for tabletop or even just like the webcam setup and all of that, like worrying about glare on your cards. You just like log in and then it's like perfectly visible for everyone. You didn't have to like re-sleeve cards. So again, I'm excited about Twin Leaf. I think that Twin Leaf is going to make a resurgence of Gym Leader Challenge content out there. People like yourself that are brewers out there that don't have access to like all the equipment that you and I have to do kind of these tabletop strings. Like all of a sudden they can kind of get their ideas out there. So that's what I think like the most exciting thing about Twin Leaf for me is just like seeing what other people are going to be doing, and finally getting to watch some really, really cool content. Some more.
I agree. Because you mentioned I play Yu-Gi-Oh! There's a client that's run by fans called Dueling Book. And there's these old formats called GOAT Format and Edison from, if you're an old man like me, back when we played cards as kids. And I mean, those scenes are completely online. Edison is a huge thing. And it's all from these fan-made sites, and it's amazing. But it's kind of funny because GLC is the format and the card game that has the closest to my heart. When people complain about Dueling Book, I'm like, don't be too hard on them. You don't know how good you have it. We had PTCGO taken from us years ago, and we're still trying to recover from it.
Years ago, it was only a year and a couple months. It feels much longer than that. But March 2023, I remember the tears that were shed that day. You'll be excited. The last deck I ever played on PTCGO was Watto's Turbo Fairy List, and I had just had such a hoot playing that deck and having a blast with it as we said farewell to PTCGO and moved on into the unknown that is webcam and tabletop and whatever we're doing now. So yeah.
You know what's funny? Our last one, I was playing DJ Backwards, and we were trying out a Lost Zone fairy deck. Spoiler alert, you don't see it for a reason. Having Lost March is not good enough, but we tried it, dang it.
That's what I love about you, Z-Man, and that's what I love about kind of your community is like there's no card. There is no idea that is off limits. There's some old heads like me. I've got my ways. My ways are set, Z-Man, but you and your team, like you guys are just always testing kind of the coolest, newest tech, pushing the limits of what's competitive. And, that's why we had to have you on for this episode. This episode's all about deck building. And of course, I'll chime in my 2 cents about, the boring conservative things that I like to do in my deck list. Because, for me, Z-Man, the most important thing is to play the game, And so I'm going to throw in my consistency cards. And I went through an exciting stage where I try to do all the wacky, cool things. But bricking hurt me. And so it's molded who I am as a deck builder. Every now and then there's a spicy card, but you're going to get good old boar, and I'm white bread, You need me on the shelf. But every now and then you need to throw some sriracha on that. And that's where you come in, Z-Man.
And honestly, the best decks are the mix of both. Because if you get too lost in the sauce, if you don't have anything that's consistent, no one will see your cool idea come to action. So what's sriracha without having some white bread and maybe some bacon in there, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, let's get into it. That's what tonight's all about. And here's tonight's crew again. I'm Jeff Bache, all about that Bache. If you guys missed our intro, and we got Z-Man Cuddles here. Both of us, we do YouTube and Twitch content. Z-Man's more Twitch, and I'm more YouTube, which I think just speaks to kind of who we are and what we do with our free time and spare time. Whereas you're more of a brewer, which the free nature of Twitch lets you get those games in. And I like to sit down and edit some videos, and that's where my YouTube stuff comes in. And that, again,
honestly, it's funny. I consider my main thing Twitter at this point because it's the easiest way to share deck lists.
And
you're right, it's just a boomer.
Yeah, and I absolutely hate social media and everything. So you will rarely ever see me post on Twitter or Instagram or anything like that. In fact, the fact that I even exist on the internet is kind of amazing. But that's that. But deck building, and people have been asking about this for a while now. Some deck building basics, and people really, really like specific numbers. And when it comes to Gym Leader Challenge decks, again, it's a singleton format. You got 60 cards. What are you doing with those 60 cards, and what does like a traditional list look like? And so when you break it down, these are kind of the numbers you get. An average, but obviously some types can go higher or lower, and we might speak on those. But you're usually looking to about 12 to 15 Pokemon. Usually see, that's kind of the standard. Lower end 12 are going to be kind of your bigger basic decks, I think. And then as you have more evolutions in play, you'll work yourself into those later teens. Supporters, you'll see about 12 to 15. Again, the goal, play one a turn. So if you have 12, that's typically going to guarantee you that. Energy between 8 and 10. This is always the number that I think is a little weird, Z-Man, and you tell me how you feel about this. I feel like you just need enough energy in your deck to take 6 KOs. So what that looks like, whether that's 10 or whether that's 8, and counting your recovery cards or your search cards like Professor's Letter, I always kind of count those as like 0.5 to a certain degree when I'm doing kind of like deck math in my head. But that's kind of how I feel, because like you're a Psychic Lost Zone player. That deck doesn't play a lot of energy. I think 6 is where it's at. Yeah. But like, all your attacks cost 1 energy. You can take 6 KOs. You have recovery cools. You're playing maybe a couple extra ways just because of prizing, but as long as you have enough energy to take 6 KOs, you're going to be fine.
Yep. And then if you're grass, you might need 12, and then all your rods and things. And then it's funny when you get into things like metal, where in metal, I don't know if this is right. I don't play Professor's Letter because it's like I'd rather that be another basic energy that I actually just Matang into.
Yeah. And Matang's kind of changed things, because before you were playing Magnezone builds, and with Magnezone builds, you really wanted cards to hand. So you saw people playing, not only Professor's Letter, but you saw what's the discard one that's kind of expensive? Earthen Vessel. Earthen Vessel, yeah. Because now you get to discard and draw more cards with your Rever Room, So that card was really, really good in metal. But 8 to 10, again, I don't know. Hydro Pump kind of like stays at like 11, I feel like. Grass is like 11 or 12, but enough for 6 KOs. Win the game. You need to win the game. Tools, I feel like 2 to 4. I've seen some lists go higher, and I'm like, that feels wrong. But I don't know. 2 to 4 is where I'm at with it. I mean, obviously, Arvin and...
Good if you're a good player. Yeah. I break that rule a lot, though.
Yeah. I mean, Arvin and Guzman Hala have basically made, including more tools, kind of an automatic include in a lot of decks, just giving you those options to search them out. And you don't want to blank an Arvin, right? So there's a lot of tools that are really good as well. Stadiums, about 2 to 3. Usually every deck is running at least 1 search stadium, probably 1 disruptive stadium to a certain degree too. And then sometimes you have an extra little bit, like I think Grass is probably running like Artisan, Turf Field, and then maybe even another stadium if they really feel the need. You'll see Parallel sometimes, I guess, in Grass, because Torterra doesn't really mind the less damage. And it can protect itself as well. And then Chaotic Swell and some other builds too is really good. And then once you hit those numbers...
Because even if you just want 1 stadium, then you want to swell for the second one. Something like water.
And then, everything else in your deck should probably just be item cards, to be honest. Once you've hit those numbers, just keep chugging in the item cards till you're good. Is this kind of like the pattern that you follow, Z-Man?
No, not at all, honestly. I kind of think about what is my deck strategy, and then I try to go around there. I then rein it in. So if I'm like looking for space. Now, that said, I think if it's your first time making a deck, this is a good way to go. It's one of the questions that you probably see a bunch too in the Discord, where someone's like, okay, how many Pokemon should I run? And that's actually where I would point people to 12 to 15, Because my first decks were terrible, I would try to cram in like 20 Pokemon. That's because that's the best part, right? Like everyone loves the Pokemon. Who cares about a shoe that is trekking? You know, I like Meganium. I'm trying to play all my different Pokemon. So I think that's the hardest part to rein in if you're a big Pokemon fan is you probably want like 12 Pokemon and then some recursion for those Pokemon. You really don't want to play 18, 20 Pokemon with some exceptions.
Yeah, yeah. Again, the grass can kind of get away from it. Grass plays a lot from the board. A lot of stage twos play into what you're already doing, right? Torterra needs evolution Pokemon to be kind of effective. And then again, like I mentioned, like you just got some of the best search stadiums too. Roserade can search you any card. So when your Pokemon is your consistency, like you can kind of get away with that. Water kind of sees that to a certain degree. I think some of the best water lists are probably still around the 15 Pokemon mark, but like Inteleon and Drizzile just really like help facilitate, getting around bricky hands. If you have all these Pokemon, as long as you can get to Drizzile, you can find ways out of it. So, this 12 to 15 is just a guide. The 12 to 15 supporters is a guide. Take that into account when you're going to deck building. Again, the thing that I'll say the most is if you have an idea, someone's thought of it already, go check out their idea first. Search those cards up on cardboardwarriors.net. You'll find someone's trying to tinker, take theirs, and then maybe kind of fit it to what you want to do. Or, brew from scratch, which is what we're going to kind of get into today. Now, the other really boring part before we get into kind of all the cool bits is consistency, redundancy, and comeback. And we talked about CRC on an episode a couple weeks ago with Jeffrey. When you're building your deck and you're thinking about what supporters and what item cards to put in there, what your Pokemon lineup looks like, really focus on these aspects of like, you need to set up. Setup is the most important thing in Gym Leader Challenge. What cards are you running to help you get set up? And is it consistent enough to find those? Obviously, the days of Gloria, Bridget, Sonia, those cards have kind of gone to the wayside as we've gotten, Buddy Buddy Poffin and, Battle VIP Pass to a certain degree. Ball Guy is always just great as well. But, think about these things as you're building your deck. Can you consistently play the game? Can your game plan function if one card is prized? Do you have redundancy in certain roles? And then if you do fall behind because you didn't have one of those first two things, can you come back and win? And so those are just kind of three big keys that I think are important. Z-Man, I think you're on board with all. I think everyone's on board with CRC, right?
Yeah. I would say if you didn't listen to that, my feelings won't be hurt. Pause this and listen to Jeffrey and Beish talk about that. I listened to it while I was cutting the grass and just was nodding my head. I probably looked like a psycho wearing headphones, cutting the grass, just nodding my head like, yeah, you got to make sure you have a comeback. If you don't take initiative, how the heck are you going to win the game? Who's to say you're going to take the first prize? That one I think it's not thought about the most is having the comeback and what it can be. It can be a tool. Maybe that's why you run more than 4 tools. Maybe you're trying to tank some hits and everyone's playing Field Blower now. Maybe it's something like Heat More and Fire. But that was an amazing episode, and I think this is actually what I would focus on. Once you get to be a moderate player, like you've made a couple decks, this is really what you should think about instead of the numbers of what are the amounts of energy in the Pokemon. It's like, what are the amounts that can get you to these goals? This is really the important thing. And these are the basics that like every deck should live by.
Yeah. And I think I really wanted to, thinking back on this episode and talking with Jeffrey afterwards too, and just thinking more about like what I value a lot when it comes to my decks. And I think flexibility too is another word that gets kind of, maybe not thrown around enough because, obviously like Arven is just such a powerful card because not only can it be a setup supporter now because you're searching that item card and you could get, Buddy Buddy Poffin now, which is getting you 2 Pokemon, whereas like Bridget is really good turn 1, but you draw it turn 6 or 7 and you're just like, well, Arven's still just as good turn 7 as it was turn 1. And I just really, really am valuing flexibility more, which is why I was always kind of into Sonia a little bit more than I was into Bridget and Gloria when I was playing, because it's like late game, sometimes you just need a supporter search 2 energy, and that's way better than being like, I don't have any basics. So
yeah. Or Tate and Liza over Cynthia if you only have one spot. The one less card, is it worth a switch? Sometimes. If you're playing like Metal or Fighting, which has a bunch of big boys, sometimes you just want that switch. So yeah, flexibility is a big one. I would say too, because the prizing can really screw you over. It's funny, that's when you can tell someone's first started playing GLC because like, oh, my prizes were awful. And they'll say it half the games and not realize it. Dude, your prizes are always awful. That's the nature of the singleton format. So you have to have a little bit of flexibility of if you only have one game plan and maybe it involves a stage one, he's going to be prized 5% of the time. So what are you going to do for that? Um, yeah, flexibility is really important. I like that. What would be the acronym? Sacrificial? Sacrificial? We'll get to
Frick.
that later.
Is it just Frick? FRCC? Frick.
Yeah. You need a frick or you'll brick.
All right, we coined it here first, chat. We're doing it.
Oh, yo,
Well,
the I could be innovation.
mm-hmm.
We are nailing this right now.
We did it. We did it. We've broken GLC. Ban us.
Too broken.
Well, and then okay, so you got these numbers. You've looked at some other lists. You've thought about CRC, and now you're ready to brew your own deck in Gym Leader Challenge. What's your first step, Z-Man? What are you looking to do when you're trying to sit in the tank and brew?
Also, for me, I actually have a stack of cards next to me. Apologize for those of you watching on video. But for me, I say, what card grabbed you? So here, for me, is all the cards from the new set that if you listen to Beisha's last podcast, he probably went over. Oh, this Kuparaja looks nice. Well, how will I build around that? Maybe there's a spicy card. There's a Weavile that came out that for 2 energy will paralyze. And you might think, oh, there's also an Articuno that's a water that paralyzes. So for me, it's finding, if you've been playing for a while, finding a new card and saying, what's the strategy and how do I build around that? If you're new, then you have a plethora of ideas because you can look through all the old cards and it'll take like an hour. But you can just filter through Psychic, type in something like Stadium on Cardboard Warriors, and you can find all the Psychic Pokemon that mention stadiums. So it just, I think sometimes is helpful to think, what is a specific card and what is the strategy? And then you want to make sure you get the consistency there. So I'll take one of these cards as an example. If you are thinking about Turbo Raikou, I guess would be one, even though that deck is kind of toxic. It's toxic because it does what it's trying to do so consistently, despite prizing and all of that. So you want to think, what is the one thing I'm trying to do? I'm trying to kill the active and the bench. And how can you do it most games? So if it's the Kuparaja, for example, from the new one, you're thinking, how do I power up this Pokemon to have 4 energy, which goes into traditional kind of metal builds with your Beldum line and your Matang line, and then you think, what stadium do I want to stick in? And so you can think, oh, something like Crystal Cave is good against spread, and then Parallel City is just good against most decks in general. That doesn't really hurt your deck's general consistency, but just gives you a little bit of an innovation to an already developed strategy. So I would say, think about that. What is one thing you can do? I'm going to take it to an extreme example. A couple years ago, when GLC was a little bit newer, we had something called PokeCon, and it was the first PokeCon, and people would get different badges based on who did the best with a type. This is before the badge system at Full Grip. So no one played fire or fighting, because 3 years ago, they just were really kind of types. And so we had to have a fire night where everyone played fire against each other. And I kid you not, I thought, okay, fire is so bad, I'm going to build a deck just based on Sunny cast form. At the time, there wasn't free water. There wasn't like anything that was really like that. And I just remember seeing that. I'm like, dude, I think I can get 8 stadiums in there by turn 2 or 3. And that's faster than what fire was at the time. So instead of worrying about cards like an N or an Iono, well, Iono wasn't even out at the point. I just thought, how do I get there as fast as I can? And those are actually my favorite decks to play because even if you don't use them, I would never bring it back to a tournament because it doesn't have a comeback, for example, and there's all this counterplay with Hex and Silent Lab and etc. But the deck building exercise of getting something like that to work consistently by turn 3 is really good, I think, for building decks that then could potentially be competitive. So that's the biggest thing for focusing on a strategy is focus really on like one thing, what grabbed you. One thing I'd say too is actually build your own brew of it first, and then once you get close, probably get as close to the 60, then look at the card, look at Cardboard Warriors or some of the other deck lists, and then see, oh my god, I forgot counter energy, or like some of the obvious things you might have missed, but they might have missed something that your brain thought of. And if you look at the list before you build your own, you could get swayed on some things. I think before this, we were talking about Lasso and Psychic, and I was mentioning things like Swell that's for countering, but I also mentioned Silene. You're like, I don't think my friend plays Silene. I know he doesn't. Like, no one else plays Silene and Lasso and Psychic that I know of, but it's because before I knew about the internet and Cardboard Warriors, I made my own Lasso and Psychic deck when I was just, just Zach playing in Baltimore. And I was like, oh, Silene, so I don't deck out, and then also Colorista's Prize, I can get back my Lost Splendor. I've been playing that card for like 2 years. I would never cut it, but it's not in anyone else's list. But if I just net deck someone else, I would have never even tried it, right? So I think that's the value of being able to focus on your own strategy first. The other thing too, when you're focusing on the strategy, I really have to reiterate this comeback. Can your list win even if it doesn't take initiative or the first prize? And then the last part of consistency is think about if you're building for open deck list or a closed deck list. So some things that are staples, like I will sometimes make Field Blower my 61st card. And I'll say, if I hit Garbodor Psychic, I'll take the loss. Honestly, how popular is that deck? I know one person that plays it. If I'm going to regionals, I'm probably not going to play anyone that plays it unless I run into like Weeder or someone, or like some of the Cardboard Warriors. I'm not going to run into too many of them. So if I'm just trying to make a really consistent fire deck, for example, which can struggle with some clogged opening hands, I just want pure consistency and maybe room for like 3 techs. Like that is just kind of how I think of it. So think about are you building for open deck list or closed deck list? If you're playing an open deck list and your opponent can see your deck list and they know you don't have Field Blower, they're going to play differently. But if with closed deck lists, you can sometimes not play cards and it'll be like a 61st card. Actually, I remember something that Tricky Jim mentioned on his stream. He won a Psychic badge because he played a Psychic deck without any tools. It's kind of doing the opposite effect with Field Blower of, I have free retreats on the special energy and I have U-turn board. I guess he wasn't playing U-turn board. I don't really know. But you can play around and not have the typical counts and now throw people off, and it'll make your deck bigger than they think it is. An example in Standard is Tord Reklov, who's the best player in the game. He won a regional in Peoria with a Lost Zone Charizard deck, and everyone at the time was playing Echoing Horn. They were playing 3 Echoing Horns. He played none because people played around the Echoing Horn even though he didn't have any. So closed deck list, if you're playing at a regional or a locals, can make a big difference, and that should also influence your deck building.
Yeah, I like all those points. Adding on to that too is like, when you're focusing on your strategy, focus on what you want to beat too, right? Like when you're building your deck, you have that player at locals that's consistently bringing Psychic Lost Zone and kicking your butt. You might want to include some cards to beat that when you're focusing on your strategy. Can you fit in those techs? And we might talk about techs a little bit later too. But that's the biggest thing. People complain all the time. Oh, this is such a bad matchup. This is such a bad matchup. I do it too. Like I just played 2 of those Caparaja decks on the Twin Leaf tournament last night. If next tournament we're gonna have an answer if that's something that I don't feel like I can beat, and that's something I expect to see again. So that's really key. Know your meta. Know your meta, whether that's local or something like that. So closed deck list, open deck list, but know who you're playing against. Most people know the 10 or 12 people that show up to their locals and what they're going to do. And I think that's where the badge system is really fun too, is like, oh, he won with fire last week. What's he bringing this week? That's where you get a little bit of a chance to bring the spice. It'll be cool to see. Well, all right. You focus on your strategy. You got your cards, your core list of cards. How are you brainstorming? How are you going from Caparaja to full-blown 60 deck list?
For me, this is a mentality. So I'm actually kind of a negative person, like internally. And a couple Lents ago, which is like a build up to Easter, if you're not familiar, you always give up something if you're Lutheran or a Catholic. And so I try to give up like negativity. This was years ago, but I was like, I need to be more positive. And it's funny how much that helps with brainstorming. So it's something that even though I gave that up for a Lent like 3 years ago, I still just try to be kind of positive throughout the day. Like when me and Ray or Waffles end each day, we always ask each other what was your favorite part of the day. If there's sort of like a negative environment, I'll kind of leave. And the most important thing for that is with brainstorming, don't listen to gatekeeping, don't listen to negativity, don't be negative, and don't listen to the noise of what other people say. If you know something is true, just do it and screw them, honestly. Like you can just show them right by winning. And remember, you are not your deck, you are not your ideas. Let it flow first without judgment. Make sure you're not judging if another friend is giving you their deck list. and then revise, and then test. See what's working. What does the data show? What's your mulligan percentages and things like that? What are you feeling from your testing? And then revise some more. But the most important thing for me to brainstorm is do not gatekeep, do not be negative, don't listen to the noise. If you know you want to do a certain strategy, just focus on that and make sure when you're brainstorming with your friends, because once you start brewing, you always talk with other brewers, you slip into each other's DMs, which is the next slide, but make sure that you are being a positive force, because whether it's Pokemon or honestly something in the business world, it's the positivity that really helps fuel creative brainstorms.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I agree with everything you just said. What I will say is know your audience. If you are asking people for help on a deck list, I see all the time someone asking, hey, here's my deck list. What do you guys think? Be open to is another thing I'll add to that. Like, obviously, there's going to be some negative comments, but there is going to be some constructive stuff in there too. Some things that, I've had to get around to is, I'm kind of a negative person too. And sometimes I don't deal the best with criticism either. And so thinking about like, this person saying, hey, why are you playing this card? They're not coming at it like you're a bad person sort of deal. But, tone can always get kind of messed up in text messages and internet and Discord messages too. So, when you ask someone for feedback on your deck, whatever form it might be, make sure you're pretty clear too about like what your expectations are. Like, hey, this is my list. These are the reasons why I'm playing it. Can you help me make this work? As opposed to like, hey, what do you think of my deck list? Well, the best grass list is Realisaur. Like, how many times has that popped up when someone's tried to talk about a different deck? Make sure you're clear. Like, I don't want to play Realisaur. And then that will, obviously, people shouldn't be negative, but that will open up more positivity if you're like, I want to play this card. Let's make it work. And I think if I'm going to point to one person that I would love to copy, it's Pellet. I think Pellet just has some of like the most positivity when it comes to deck building and brewing and like what his community is all about. And then when he hops into the Tricky Gym or the Cardboard Warriors Discord, he's not trying to play the best meta deck. He is like, I want to play a ghost only deck. Help me build it. And then, 15 people hop on and like, yeah, let's make this work. And so, that's my deck building hero. That's my community hero. So singing Pellet's praises, who we've had on before. So check him out at Team Moo Moo Milk while we're sharing some positivity here. But I wish more positivity is great. Sometimes I wish I could be that more positive person.
Yeah, but I will say, I think I said this before, but do remember too, you're not your deck and you're not your idea. So in the same way too, if someone's doing constructive criticism, that's not negativity. That's just, we're just working towards the idea and trying to get it to the best spot. So I think that is an important point that you mentioned too, is don't be overly sensitive either. But just in terms of if you're trying to come up with this idea and you're trying to reach the pyramid of how do we get to the peak, just kind of leave out everything and try everything and get up there. That's really what I do. Like, is it Pellet or Pele?
I want to say Pellet. Okay. That's what I called him on stream, and if I was wrong, I'm sorry that I talked to him for 2 hours calling him the wrong thing.
But yeah, it's fun. I remember when we were working on a dark deck called Stygian Kingdom. Someone did a spreadsheet with all the different ideas and the different cards that people had out. And that for me is when I really fell in love with deck building with an online community, because we just all had our different ideas and it was fine, and we were just all trying to work towards the same purpose of no one has cracked Nido Queen and Nido King. And it's kind of funny too, because that's a time where the strategy changed, because I think we've both said this on the podcast, but like we were kind of focused on the Nido King, but then it turned out Nido Queen was really good counter to the meta at the time. I haven't touched the deck in about 6 months, so I'm not sure if that still holds up. But Snorlax was enemy number 1, and so that was just like a huge thing. And fighting wasn't on the radar at that time, so the weakness matchup didn't really matter. But it's kind of nice when you can just take an obscure idea, work on it with, I was like 6 or 7 people, and we all had our different ideas, and you could take from different people from the spreadsheet. That's deck building at its finest.
Yeah, great. Yeah, love it. This is a deck I still love. I'm like you. I haven't picked it up in 6 months. Snorlax has not been a problem for me anymore. No. Just okie dokie. Bye-bye.
Yep.
Well, you focus on your strategy. You have brainstormed an idea. It feels there, but it might be a bit of a meme. What are you feeling about that, Z-Man?
I say meme it up. because you never know when a meme might become real. Some of them, most of them, are memes. Like what I'll play on our Monday streams are just new cards that I want to try something. So like last night, for example, we were trying a psychic control based on Hypno, which does 80, and then if they attach an energy to their active, it just ends their turn. It's like, well, that's a cool power, but how do we make that matter? If you're against something like Snorlax, it doesn't matter. So what you do is you gust up the active, and then you Dusk Noir the damage to the bench, and you just keep disrupting and disrupting and spreading until ha 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 you controlled their board. Obviously, you just play Tinkaton Glade if you're going to Baltimore regionals or regionals. But the funny thing is, sometimes you'll crack real things by memeing it because other people aren't trying this. So all of these different points kind of go to one another, but it's try, test everything. There's such an advantage of playing cards that your opponent has to read for the first time when they're playing against you. So I've gotten a badge with Water with Swim Freely before because it was a newer player. They didn't, or they've been playing standard, but they started like me around Fusion Strike. They didn't know that they knew what Swim Freely did. They didn't know there was a Quagsire that could move the energy to the Kyogre in the active. So a lot of times when someone, I bench the Wooper, they might not know what that does. There's just an advantage of playing cards that your opponent has to read for the first time, or if you're a different kind of stylistic player. So we were talking before the podcast that you love spread decks, and so like you might call grass spread a meme. I think I would too. But what if it gets cracked in a card eventually? So for example, we got a grass Joltik, and I don't know if that really solves it. I don't think that spider that. Oh, do you have it right there? Yeah, let's go. And see, you already have a pre-made list because you've been working on Hisu and Lilligant. I know I've been working on that thing too. And like you're just kind of waiting for the right pieces to come together. But never be afraid to meme because also it's just fun. It'll make it where you don't lose your interest in the game. Because remember, this isn't our main like objective in life. This is our hobby. And for some reason, card people get really stuck on making it way too serious. Remember to meme it up. Play the Wugtrio Gyarados deck. Play a cast form deck. Have fun with the card game. This is how you're kind of taking a break from real life. So remember to keep it the meme. And I see your Rotom up there, and I should have asked you this beforehand, but I think I made a Rotom deck where it gets like a couple tools in the graveyard and then can attack for free. I think I saw one of your local people like actually picked it up and started playing the deck too.
Yeah, so Rob, who won our last locals, he actually played grass spread against his psychic list. He was not playing Rotom tools. He was having kind of a rough go, if I'm going to be honest, at our locals. He loves Free Water, which is his first deck, which is a wonderful creation from Mickey. And then he like wanted to do something. He played, I think, that Rotom or something as like an expanded when he had a brief foray into Pokemon at some point. So he wanted to make that Rotom deck work. And he just was having a tough go, but he realized like the best parts about his deck was he was playing Dragapult because it ended up being it went from a free Rotom only attack deck to kind of like let's put some cheaper attackers in, and then you realize like the best part of the deck was like Marshadow Dragapult, and I was like, just play like take a traditional psychic deck and play it. And he did that. That was actually his idea. He came up with that. I'm just going to take a regular deck and play it and see what I do. And he just won. I was like, dude, after you've been memeing it up, after you've been like playing on hard mode for so long, picking up a real deck, it just feels so good. And he like picked up a real deck and won 3-0. We've had a really fun game. He had to Guzma me. Like he had Palpad, VS Seeker, Lusamine, all to get Guzma back. So he had 4 or 5 different switch outs in that game because I was like Hisuian Lilligant into Pokédoll. I was like counter catcher that up and it went down to the last prize, and it was just a really satisfying game even though I lost, and then for him to win and we got to put his name up on the board, I was just like, oh yes. But I'm hoping that he comes back to Rotom tools, I guess is what I'm getting at. I think he's playing Free Water tomorrow night. That's our locals. I'm excited to see what he'll do with that.
Think the free water deck is actually a perfect example of something that probably started as a meme. I don't know Mickey too well, but he probably just wanted to see a proof of concept. He wanted to see, oh, can I get this to work consistently? And then, surprise, surprise, it does work. So, I mean, that's another good example where memes can become like tier 2 decks, tier 3 decks. Yeah, I don't really care too much about putting things on tiers, but it works. It can win. You never know. And it's funny too because I feel like your friend probably did a good job because if you're a baseball fan, if you're swinging before you go out to the plate, you put a weight on your bat. So sometimes you play those harder decks, but also it's because you enjoy the game more when you're playing something like that. So you might come to the same logical conclusions as something as a what we'll call standard psychic list, but you'll have more disconcernment, or you'll have more of an understanding of why some of those cards are in there because you feel like you made them. Other people might have came to the same conclusion, but you didn't just net deck without understanding. You just came to the same conclusions from having the reps. So I think honestly, for a new person, you can just start with, hey, I like this card. Maybe because I played with it back in the day. Maybe it's my favorite Pokemon. Whatever it is, it's honestly a great way to get into the game, which I feel like a lot of people don't say, because if you're stuck on competitive mode, you'll say, this is the best deck, play this. No,
Yeah,
I agree. Meme it up.
move it up. So, I mean, obviously, younger Jeff, and by younger Jeff, I mean like a year ago, Beish, was like more into the meme than I am now. And we talked about this too in our lead up to it. Is I've just gotten boring because I don't have a lot of time, just like you do. I have a 2-year-old at home who just started school, so kudos to him. Yesterday was his first day. Tomorrow's his second day. It's fake school, but it's school nonetheless. But when I don't have that much time, it's tougher to want to meme it because sometimes your meme decks, they just fall a little short. They're a little less consistent. Sometimes you get 6-0'd prizes. So I've been trying to maximize my Pokemon time, and brewing has gotten away with me because, like you mentioned, there's an extensive card pool that exists, and if you're digging through all those cards, brewing and testing just takes a lot of time. So dedicate yourself to that. I'm obviously at a point where I'm like, I kind of know like what I want all my supporter and trainer suites to look like for kind of a consistent deck at this point. When I'm building a deck, I kind of start with like 10 cards that I'm like, these are auto includes for Beish. And then I kind of move from there. It's kind of a little bit boring. I need to go back to the meme. I've had colorless birds sleeved up over here. And I just, I talked to Weeder. I was like, Weeder, we need to play this on stream. He's like, well, I don't have any decks of similar power level. And I was like, Twin Leaf stuff is getting away. So I need to find time to make a colorless video, colorless bird video, because I know people love the birds. I love the birds too. That's my next meme deck I'm gonna try. And I say meme deck, but it got second place at a CBW tournament, so like it's competitive. It's won games. Snorlax was in it as a bird.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, but it's okay.
Yeah.
The other thing too, is I'll say creativity comes in waves. I noticed there's a bass guitar on yours, and I play music as well. I've been playing guitar for 20 years, and it's kind of funny because right now I'm not really writing music. At nighttime when I used to write music, I'm building decks. Not saying one's better or the worse, but it's just like things come in waves. So when I wasn't building decks, I was writing songs. It's okay for things to come in waves, and just let it flow. Honestly.
Your words of encouragement have made me want to brew now. I'm thinking maybe I'll do something with the new Joltik and Raikou. It'll be great, I think.
No.
All right. You memed it up. You have all these ideas. You brainstormed within yourself. You've thought of a strategy. How do you take your pile of 60 cards? How do you take that to the next level? Z-Man.
All right, for me, there's 4 factors. Number 1, the friend that you DM every night. For me, that's DJ Backwards. We will always come up with meme decks or different ideas for decks for new cards, and we'll talk about it. Who knows if they always get built. The second one is the friend or wife that you test with every day. For me, that's me and Waffles. We'll just play a game every day. And I say test as if it's serious, but it's just a long day, and work is stressful. We want to play some Pokemon cards. The third is DMs of locals and online experts. My locals, Bohemian, got me in here with Cardboard Warriors. I'm so grateful for it. I've never played a webcam game, but I really like talking with other people that are as passionate about this weird hobby as I am. Use that to your advantage. A lot of people do. A lot of you DM me, but I would say keep doing it. I like talking about it. It's fun. So sometimes I'll post a list on Twitter or something, and then I'll have someone be like, oh, I was working on that too. And do that. I encourage you. Don't be scared to talk to anyone who is in one of the Discords or on Poke Twitter or anything like that. Use that to your advantage. We all like the same hobby. If we ran into each other on the street both wearing Pokemon shirts, we're going to talk to each other because we're both in the same niche. And that goes into number 4, posting on socials. The first thing is, I'd say if you did well with the deck and you've been doing well with it consistently, share after your results so you can share the ideas and continue to improve the format. For example, Hitmons and yourself and Castella are just like cemented into that deck. Like when I'm trying to get my fighting badge, I'm gonna DM Costella and yourself to say, which route do I go? I had to take fighting today. I thought I was gonna try to improve Hitmons, and Costella's just like, no, and here's why. I listened. So, because it's just like, all right, yeah, that's a good point. Or I talk to you, I'm like, I have a psychic metagame. What's the best way to do it? You're like, dude, I see this colossal deck. And some people would call that maybe like a meme in the sense of the competitive thing is Hitmons. But no, I believe you. I'm like, you know what? This guy knows fighting. He's a brewer. Let me see what I can kind of do. I'm going to work with the Knackle and the Okidogi, and I'm 5-1 with the list over the week. You were right. Like, cards like Tarakian have the comeback mechanic. Not everyone knows what they do. And healing 30 can matter. The other time you post and you use social media is before results. And that's kind of what I was talking about here. Not just for DMs, but to get ideas and share with where your head is at. So, for example, the Hypno Psychic control deck, which I'll probably won't hear from again in like 2 weeks, but being able to talk with people on that on Twitter to say like, oh, do you have enough disruption? I realized I need a Thornton in there. Like, just getting more eyes on a deck can really help to be able to just kind of get different ideas. Another thing too is sometimes nerdy people will have like different contests. I think the one at Cardboard Warriors is called the Weekly Cook-Off. I've like actually bought cards for 2 of the decks that I have made from that. A Rainbow Colorless build because of a card I found from I think it's Subject that runs those, and then a Dark Control deck that like actually looks pretty sick and it works the same as Block Snorlax if you know standard format, which won a regionals. I didn't know there was a Black Spiritomb, so that's where the community can really help too. I swear I've probably read through all the different cards. But it's just such a great way to be able to share ideas. Don't be shy. Reach out to it. We're all human. Um, really, I value the community. It's the most important part because on a Tuesday night like tonight, where I'm coming back from locals, let's say I went 0-3, I still was just hanging out with my friends on a Tuesday night as a dude who's like 32 years old. That's awesome, So celebrate your community and don't forget that's the most important thing of the game.
Can't agree more. I mean, where would I be without Cardboard Warriors is what I kind of say every day. We didn't have locals in Columbia when I started playing. I had to drive an hour to Augusta to even play in my first tournament. And of course, I took Grass Spread with me back then. But just like the way that the Cardboard Warriors has like instilled confidence in me in my deck building. I remember posting my first Hitmon list and getting feedback from a lot of different players, Costella among them, and different ideas, refining my first list. I had Annihilate in my first list, and I love that Annihilate, but you realize that stage 2 is kind of tough. So I won a tournament with Annihilate in my deck. And then, the next week I was like, you know what, let's take it out. And you kind of are refining based on kind of what feedback you get. Even if you're winning, there's always something to change. And your community is there to kind of give you ideas and what you can do and help you out and give you positive feedback. And sometimes, again, like we'll mention there will be some negativity and, fight through that and get to the core of what you want to do and how you want to play. I have my version of Hitmon Bros, which is different than Costella's list. I'm not going to change it. I'm going to play Ninja Boy, guys. You're not going to stop me from playing Ninja Boy. If you don't see why Ninja Boy is good, I'm sorry. It's got a ninja on it. Come on. So, I'm going to keep. Yeah. So like, I'm going to keep doing my thing, but, having, people that I talk to, for me, it's Weeder. Weeder and I have a very similar mindset when it comes to how can we make our decks consistent. And we both want the same thing. We want to win with our decks. Winning with someone else's deck is great. Like, don't get me wrong, winning's winning, and winning is fun if that's what you want to do. But like, there's just something different about taking your brew that you've just spent hours talking to someone else about, putting in the work, putting in the testing. I'll throw out Meganium out there. One of my first grass list was a Meganium build just because that's one of my favorite Pokemon, and Ghouls had a great idea about like almost a Torterra only deck, and he posted his list up in the Tricky Gym Discord, and I had been trying to get Meganium to work forever. I saw his list. I'm like, dude, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. He's like, I'm going to do this, and we just kind of gone back and forth on it. We've even played a Meganium Mirror, which I do not recommend playing Meganium Mirrors because whoever bosses up Meganium first just wins. But it's like, that's the great part of the community. So because of like what I started doing with Cardboard Warriors, I was able to kind of build our local community. Now we've got like 10 dedicated players that come out like every week to play. We've had up to 16. We run an event out in Sumter. Like, community is key. And like I mentioned, you throw a deck out there, my locals are talking about playing your decks. Like, communities bleed into each other, and it just makes the format just that much better. Grow GLC. That's what we're all about here.
I've never played against Jeffrey, but I've played against his deck over 20 times. Because, the communities really do bleed into one another. It's a beautiful thing.
Well, we talked, all there kind of is about like how to get your deck to where you want to get. Obviously, the basics, we've talked about kind of your mindset behind it, where my boring brain is at too. But let's get into kind of some of your list, where you brewed, thoughts, ideas, how you came into them. And we got to start with a deck that we've mentioned quite a bit so far, the Nido deck, which, by the way, I love the name. I know it's got a couple of different names out there. Obviously, just the Nidos is one that you'll see. You'll see Stygian Kingdom as one, which just means Dark Kingdom. But your build specifically, Z-Man, talk to us about the whole process.
Yeah, and actually, I want to give credit to Ghouls, who you just mentioned, because he's still running this deck, and as I understand, doing well in one of the Cardboard Warrior leagues with it. So he's keeping it going. Someone like me will sometimes put down a deck once I selfishly get a badge with it at my locals. Although I kind of want to pick it up for a different store now, because just seeing someone like Ghouls continue to run with it. But this to me is the idea of just kind of being able to do something different. So the Pokemon 151 set came out, and I just thought, the Zoroark just rotated in standard, and I missed it. Like, that was such a strong one. But seeing the fact that you could kind of do this no energy thing is how I started with it with Nidoking. I built this, and then I remember testing into Ray with dragons, and she prized a Garchomp line, and then all of her other attackers were basic. This is before Shrouded Fables and Haxorus came out. And she's like, did you just do this matchup on purpose to show like how good the deck is? Like, no. And then that's when you realize, oh, Nidoqueen is so good. And again, at the time, it was just the meta was like, was Snorlax. And that's what everyone was scared of, and Psychic. And so, like, you hit Psychic for weakness, you hit the Snorlax for the basic thing. And I actually have a Duraludon behind me with an Umbreon, funny enough. That deck won Regionals and Standard a bunch. You have something like Mega Aldino, which won Worlds before. And actually, should give a shout out to what won Worlds the week before that, which was the Archie's Blastoise, which is just a meme deck that people knew about but didn't really respect, and that just took over. Weird decks can win all the time. And without hashing too much of what we talked about a little bit earlier, this one is always going to be, for me, my closest to heart deck, no matter what, because of the fact that it was made by an online community and then tested locally. This is now a pre-made deck that you can buy for $50 off of Darkside Games. And to me, it's just so neat that this always sells out within an hour of when they get all the cards. And that's not of anything in terms of the sales or the shop. It's just so cool that like this group of us from nowhere kind of built something that was not worked on, and now like people build this and play this. So those are some of my favorite kinds of decks. Outside of this, Fairy Control is something that I'm starting to get a little bit known for on Poke Twitter. And that was just years of me playing it and tweaking it. And Xeroxix is like the difference maker, where you really are not going to hit time, even if you're not just playing at the speed of light. And so finally, I'm seeing other people that tweet out at me like, hey, I won my local fairy badge with this. I went 2-1 with this. You're right. Once it gets set up, you're good. Or I misplayed. I should have done this or that, but now I'm getting it. To me, these are some of the coolest decks. And this is like the brewer's dream, is when you're building a deck and then you see other people using it. That's the coolest thing, and why it's so important to be able to share the results and make sure you highlight the community and the ideas that came from people like Ghouls and Pellet and Subject. But I just really wanted to show this as a meme deck that became meme in quotes, because it actually sort of worked.
It's definitely a deck I've enjoyed playing. I did doubt it. I mean, I was a vocal doubter about the deck. 2 stage 2s in Dark, whose only really consistency piece is a Liepard that trades away. And then you realize there's a lot of kind of cool, neat things that you get to do. And you look at kind of what the deck building that has gone into this, and you can see that, like, you don't need your basic lines for your Nido King and Nido Queen when you can just discard them to trade and then Phantom Zoroark them into play. Like you can use your Hisuian Heavy Ball for something else if that's your go-to. You know, recovering those lines and using Nido King over and over again while your Nido Queen sits safely on the bench is always a good thing. And then the Nido Queen just basically stalling basics is just such a good meta call if you're worried about Dragon and Colorless, kind of what you alluded to earlier. You know, I took kind of your build. I looked at Pellet's build too. You know, I added kind of the things that I felt like I wanted into my list because, you know, we always take someone else's list and add our own personal touches. You know, tinkering is a fun too, even if it's not brewing. And I just remember running with this deck and being like running into like a traditional lightning build and be like, well, Raikou can't touch Nido Queen. Regieleki can't touch Nido Queen. You know, they basically had to get the Luxray. The stage 2 Luxray was like they're really only out to it. And then, you know, you're like, cool. You know, I just have other attackers. I'm just going to Hoopa you early. You know, Lightning doesn't have any really tanky boys, so like 2 Hoopa attacks will do it. And then, of course, you just got the Weezing here to stall. So, like, just everything about this list is really cool and really great. I mean, it's hard not to run Guzzlord, like, let's be honest, in Dark, but just having other options and having cool, neat options that can win games is super sweet. And I love this list and I love everything about it.
Really glad you mentioned the Guzzlord. That highlights such an important part because I didn't even think about it. Because like if you tie in a type is supposed to run this, that's sort of counterintuitive to like what's your strategy. So for like thinking of something like this, it's like okay, how the heck do I get 2 stage 2s going in Dark? So like Guzzlord's not part of that equation. So I never even like considered it. But you're right. That's such an important thing. And it's funny because sometimes you have to make sure you're not rejecting meta just because you want to reject it. So to give an example for that, I'm really happy with where I have our Poison Dark list. And Waffles is going to hate this. I have a Guzzlord in there. We were trying not to run it because we didn't want to be typical. But it's like, it turns out when you're damaging things with Poison, it's really nice to clean them up afterwards, especially because you're running a lot of the special energies anyway and Janine's. And it's like, well, I hate it, but Guzzlord fits in here. So also, don't be a contrarian for the sake of being a contrarian. Really make sure you focus just on like what your strategy is.
No, I mean, I had a similar thing recently where I was trying Dark Spread. And, you know, I love Dark Spread. We got a new tool in Evil Tall, which basically is the same thing as Azelf in Psychic, where you put 2 damage counters on things that already have damage counters on them. So you have the Absol that spreads damage. Then you can come into the Evil Tall. And they're kind of like both kind of beefier spreaders. Because when you think of basic spreaders, usually you think like kind of small, like 1-hit KO attackers, but like these are 100 plus HPs. So like I'm sitting there with both these cards and I'm like, hey, I'm going to run some, there's not a lot of spreaders in Dark. So I'm going to try to keep these alive as long as I could. So I threw in like Bravery Charm and Cape of Toughness. And I'm like, okay, those cards work really well with Guzzlord. Guzzlord only hits 120. If I don't have a damage mod on it, I need to make sure I hit these numbers. So my spread deck kind of ended up just being like my spreaders were just muscle bands, like basically.
Oh,
like,
no.
And then Guzzlord would come in and just like sweep up like what was already there. And it again, the idea that you mentioned, like Guzzlord is good. Like I should play Guzzlord in that deck, and I felt like not playing Guzzlord would be contrarian to what should be good in that Dark deck. I really wanted to try 3-prize Crobat, but it's a lot. I mean, everyone knows 3-prize Crobat is a lot. It's got a lightning rod on its back. It's never going to survive. And it doesn't work well with Devo TM either. It's kind of tough. So Guzzlord it was. I liked that list, but I don't know if I'll be running it until we get at least one more good spreader. Rule of Evil, Weavile is close.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Dude, someone got their dark badge with that, and it's because in their last match they weren't expecting that Weavile. Like the guy Hutch threw down that Weavile, and the guys, oh, hold on, that's not the Weavile I was expecting. And then had to read is like, it's something crazy, isn't it? 50 spread everywhere,
60 to Pokemon with abilities.
Yeah, and that's most Pokemon. So that card is insane.
Yeah, it's most Pokemon that. But not in Dark. The only thing that actually hit in my Dark list was Liepard, which came up more than once as an issue. But I'm excited to work on that list. Yeah,
that's the fun part is you said you weren't brewing, but that's a new card, and maybe you're just being too hard on yourself. That sounds like a sick brew. And when more stuff comes out, you'll already have that baseline that you can pull up and mess with and retinker with. So I love that.
yeah, yeah. Well, moving on. Next deck that we want to talk about, a deck that I have not played against, and a deck that I'm happy to not have played against. Wugtrio Mill. Z-Man, talk to us about the process again.
Man, this deck almost ended my marriage. I brought this to League pre-kids when I was playing with Waffles too. I got 6 heads on that Gyarados. I actually won. I went 2-1 that night because my heads were rolling correct. And honestly, if I won one of those 3 or 4 games that night, I felt like I won the thing. This is just full meme, and this is just like to test your chops as a deck builder. Wugtrio Mill. So you have the Gyarados and the Wugtrio. So if you have the Gyarados in the active, you want to have the Wiglet on the bench. Water has tons of recovery. You can play the Rescue Carrier, the Rescue Stretcher. You have Nessa. You could play Clara if you want. I think I had Miriam at the time. That seems trash. I should have played Clara. But I just think take these kind of decks and like just play it out. Like some people will get stuck on an idea and then do nothing with it. Like I said, I have all these Shrouded Fable cards here. It's gonna take me forever to get through all of them, but you know what? The sets take 3 months. Just try it out, and it's really fun. And sometimes you'll enjoy a deck enough where, for me, I choose everything purely on vibes of what I'm gonna play that night. This was one of those times where I was just vibing with Wugtrio, and it's such a fun one. I did this for one of my first streams, and I think that's how Lee Hoffman mentioned. He's like, "Oh yeah," or maybe it was Bat Squid. If it was Bat Squid, mentioned he's like, "Oh, that's when I knew to watch you," because like different things will catch different people, and when you're trying to like work on building a community and helping grow a game, stuff like this can just catch different people. Because Wugtrio is also a meme deck in standard too. You have the luxury of having 4 of them in that one. Funny enough, this Gyarados is in standard too. But oh man, just don't be afraid to meme it up. It goes to that. Have fun.
I'm going to need you to explain to me and our listeners what the Gyarados and the Wugtrio do, because I, as someone who's never played a second in standard, and as someone who has never seen this deck, I need you to teach me like I'm a 2-year-old. What is up with it?
All right, Wugtrio is for triple colorless. You can roll 3 coins, and for each head you mill 3. So you get a max of 9. You're going to average out 3 to 6 mills. Gotta remember, this is a singleton format, so it's a form of control that is really powerful, because if you take away their Versus Seeker, their Field Blower, they're like, uh-oh. So I run Reversal Energy, because you're always behind, so you're not taking prizes, and Triple Acceleration. Those 2 cards are sick. Once Reversal Energy came out is when I wanted to play this to a locals, because you don't even need Frostmoth. You can just attach that for turn. Now in this deck, I do play the Frostmoth, because the other strategy would be going like Silene and Recycle, which would coin flip, put it on top of your deck, draw it with Octillery, Roseanne's backup. I thought about that. That's too cheesy. It's honestly just easier to go Frostmoth, attach them, and then the turns where you're whiffing or they KO that, you can go Reversal or Triple Excel, and you can still play the special charge. The Gyarados is a lot more sackier. You roll a coin, and then you mill either 2 or 3, I think it's 2 cards for every head you get, and you just keep going until you stop. So that time where I got 6, it was 6 heads in a row. It was so great.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like you're going to make a lot of friends with this deck, but it does. It seems reasonable. It fits the bill for a Z-Man deck. You know, I was looking here, like I know the Wugtrio has something to do with milling cards and coin flips, because I'm looking at Tricky Coin and Glimwood Tangle in your list.
Thank you. Those are important points. You can control the RNG a little bit because of Glimwood Tangle and Tricky Coin.
Yeah, which I appreciate a lot. You know.
Yeah. And then you know what's funny is I won one of them because I like milled them out and I was running out of resources. Dude, I just like wishy-washy in the active. And as it turns out, 180 is a lot to deal with. Luxury Escape wasn't out at the time, but you could put that on there and have a 280 basic. So when you need to chill, like if you don't play the Fairy Doll, Wishy-Washy is kind of like a Fairy Doll. So that card's pretty sick too.
I mean, I've had that Wishy-Washy stall me out so many times. I remember I was just playing a Whales deck, and it's just like the jumbo-sized Whale Lord, and my opponent put that Wailord in the active, or that Wishy-Washy into the active, and I was playing Hitmon Bros, and like I would damage it, but couldn't quite KO it. I think this was pre-Okie Dokie, and they just flipped tails and put it back into their deck a couple times, and then Brooklet Hill was out, so they just recovered it, put it back into the active, knowing I couldn't return KO it, and I was just like, oh god, how many turns? I'm just waiting until they get head. So they bought like 3 or 4 turns and like reestablished a board. Like that Wishy-Washy can be a terror, again, like you mentioned, kind of as a doll substitute. So I like it a lot.
The nice thing for water is you really can meme with it because you have so much consistency built into the engine between Shady Dealings and Octillery. So like something that you deal with, I was trying to work on a grass control deck for the weekly cook-off this week. That is not worth mentioning. But the neat thing about water is you can play something like a Team Rocket's Handiwork, a mill supporter, because you can just draw up your hand with Octillery. So it's nice when you have an engine that can afford that. I mean, look at something like Free Water. The reason that works better than just the cast form that's the fire is because when you have Shady Dealings and Octillery, you have that consistency piece built into your Pokemon engine, you can afford to go a little bit more disruption. I'm someone that's a huge control enjoyer, and the hardest thing to balance is the ratio of consistency to disruption. You have to have enough consistency because if you don't set up your engine, you're going to lose and get ran over. But then you also have to have like some form of disruption. And it feels bad to cut something like a professor's research for a Team Yellhorn, right? But you also kind of have to have both. So that's the hardest part of deck building. But those challenges are really fun. So in something like this list, this is before Iono existed, but there's like no research for example. Oh no, Iono isn't there. I'm sorry. Iono came out in the same set as Reversal Energy. But I can't afford to run research, which that's a tough one. But it is because I have like other consistency cards like Cynthia because I didn't want to discard my special energy, Iono, and Ball Guy. That's kind of it, and it's because of some of those other cards. Or something like a Teammates that can work as both. It can grab your counter catcher for a disruption, and then maybe your Ultra Ball to set up the Octillery. So, I'd say if you're looking to meme, water is a great way to be able to support that.
Yeah. And this is where, like, because I'm with you, because water is great. I've been playing a Krabby water spread deck just because I love Krabby. There's like Aqua Shower Krabby is 1 energy, just 10 everywhere. It's got 2 retreat, so it's not
Sorry,
ideal.
but you remember Ash's Krabby from the anime?
Yeah, that's my favorite Pokemon. Like, well, at least one of my favorite.
He was the MVP. No one ever talks about that. Everyone talks about like Muck was one of the MVPs too. There you go. See, Jeff, you're an OG. But I mean that Krabby was
Elite Four episode or whatever the Champions League episode where like that Krabby is soloed, like it evolved into Kingler afterward. It just soloed the team. I mean, like I'll watch that episode just on repeat. Like that's going to be Ollie's, which is my son. That's going to be his first Pokemon episode. It's just watching that Krabby go to town.
Oh yeah, I made sure our kids' first one was episode 6, which is the Sandshrew one, and I made sure their first songs were Coheed and Cambria. Yeah, you got to have the meaningful first.
That's the Sandshrew that was like training with like all the weights and stuff, right? Okay, yeah.
It could jump into the pool. Yeah, Sandshrew is my obvious favorite. If you guys have a camera, I have them tattooed on my bicep. I am obsessed with Sandshrew. It's the Brock Sandshrew. It's even the TCG one.
Yeah, but back to my point before I got sidetracked by Krabby, because I'll talk all day about Krabby. My Discord little background, if you click into like my profile, is the Ash is like bent over staring at the Krabby walk by him. Like that's the one episode where he meets Krabby is also a good one. But balancing the meme with the consistency, because you mentioned you couldn't run research because of the energies. Well, in my Krabby Water Spread deck, which is based off of a Mickey deck, which was then taken, and Yuzu Pazu did a little bit of work with it, and then I was like, hey, Palafin had come out, let's try Palafin, who does 30 to the active and 30 to the bench, plus has 210 as an attack. Like, it just seemed really good. But your Articuno Blindside is like your comeback mechanic in that deck, and so when you're running like a combo like that is so important to what you're trying to do, you can't just discard everything, right? So like playing Cynthia, which is what I'm doing in that deck list too, even though Cynthia doesn't really quite work as well as some other cards might with like an artillery type card, it's still just worth it to like make sure I'm saving cards and like storing those cards back into my deck if I don't need them, because that's going to come up at some point. The same way that like reversal energy is really important for your Wugtrio mill deck. So keep the meme alive, keep the consistency alive, but again, there's going to be some trade-off at some point when you're building your deck.
Also, I will say that's why my favorite control decks are the ones that reuse resources. Like I love Fairy Control because I can run Hapu, Explorer's Guidance, and Research. Because once you hit the end of your deck, you get to see all those cards again. You can recover literally every card that you want to see back. So those have become my favorite. But my heart belongs to Wugtrio Mill, one of my first meme decks.
I mean, Ursaluna is the same way, right? There's the Ursaluna with the Pete Hunt that gets things back to your hand, so you can like in consecutive turns heal with Max Potion and then get back your triple acceleration energy. So you like on a opposite turns you get to attack, heal, and like that deck is really fun in that regard too if you're into reusing resources.
That one's another great example of all of this, because I'm sure that started as a proof of concept from Weeder, or I'm not sure if Weeder's the originator of it. Do you know?
It's a Leo list. So if you
Leo,
guys know
okay.
Leonardo, he's a really big colorless control player, and he had like a Regigigas stall list. And he's been working on some of the OG stuff. I don't know if like who was first, him or Grant, but I kind of like, because I know Leo and the Cardboard Warriors, I want to give him a lot of credit for a lot of these builds. But he has been working on a lot of those builds. He even was working on a really cool like only Snorlax build, which kind of the same concept as the Meganium Torterra build, where you just basically have this monster Snorlax that continuously takes 6 KOs and just keeps coming back. But he's really, really unique with what he does with those decks. And I remember I got a chance to play Ursaluna against him, and he was just like, "Yeah, dude, I'm playing grass. Spam that Parallel City against me. Like that's what, like you Pete Hunt the Parallel City, keep my Torterra damage down, heal, mill me out. Like I'm going to be grabbing energy from my deck anyway." So it was a cool matchup. It's a cool deck, and it fits every single bit of this. I think Ursaluna is a super great deck, underplayed. I think it's
Yeah,
real. It's hard to pilot. And that's kind of the
it is.
part. The memes are hard to pilot, which is why so much work goes into the process of building and testing and tweaking. That's why, and this is the great thing
Yeah.
about Gym Leader Challenge, is that you often see players winning with their decks because they've practiced it the most. It's not necessarily the best deck that's going to win. It's the people that have put in the most practice, the most effort, learning the format. That's why when we point to Jeffrey, like Jeffrey plays like 2 decks that I know of. He plays the colorless deck that you mentioned. He plays dark, and he spent more time perfecting those decks than anyone and tweaking them for what he's expecting to see. And when you just put that amount of love, energy, and effort into something, I mean, you're going to reap those rewards at some point.
You know why every card is there. So like that's the benefit of brewing is you're the one that put that field blower in there. You know when you can discard it and when you can't.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, I'm sure like looking at like a deck like that, someone new colorless control, they're like, this Ursaluna came out, let me try it. And then just from testing and testing, again, you're not your ideas, and you can always go back to their deck, right? But like spending that time to make sure you can focus on those new cards, it really paid off. We have another competitive archetype. Ursaluna is a great example of that.
Last deck that we're going to talk about, Z-Man, is kind of the boring list of the bunch. We started off spicy and we're ending on the beige way. All right, and this is still your list, but it feels very beigey. And this is Metal Maker. Talk to us about it.
Yeah, I just wanted to share like some consistency too. There's some types like metal and fire where I really did just go for pure consistency because to me the types are not memes, but it's just sort of unique into themselves. And so just kind of finding what the power level of it is fun. So this is the list that is close to what I got my badge with. The Cooper Raja wasn't out, so I was using Dialga and a Cobalion or something like that, like 2 other basic attackers. But this was just really fun to be able to kind of set up. And I really like Metal because you just focus actually on your engine of getting the Matang, the Bronzong, and the Revavroom set up. And like you're actually kind of chilling turn to turn. The comeback mechanic is great. You can go down one and then tank enough hits and come back. The Heatran's actually really good. That's funny because like on paper it might seem inconsistent. Why would I put fire energies into a deck where I'm trying to hit all my Matangs? But what you find is like what the deck's weak to is Hex or a bad Gust at the right time. And if they try to Gust around the Heatran, the only conditions the fire energy, a real deck isn't really playing like Crushing Hammer or something like that. So that condition's kind of always met if they Gust around it. So that actually is a really strong attacker. Um, and this just goes to show that for sometimes it's okay to just kind of play boring list, quote unquote. I actually really love metal now. This is one of my favorite types, and this list looks pretty standard. There's not like a weird, I don't know. I don't even know a weird card. There's not a weird card in it, but it's actually one of my favorites because I actually just wanted to see like how good can I make this archetype. I'm really happy with this list. This is something where now I don't think we were streaming when we were talking about this, but I have 4 or 5 local stores that do GLC towards me, and the first couple ones I like to try to bring some of my best lists, and then kind of like after that sort of tinker around. Metal's one of those ones where I like to bring. I'm happy with the colorless matchup. I'm happy with the spread matchup. So I just kind of like it into like a general meta. Um, it's something that you can take pride of just getting a list as good as you can. I've also been able to be happy with consistency through failure. So it took me like 2 months to get my fire badge, and a lot of DMing with Weeder, talking to people on the Tricky Gym and the Cardboard Warriors Discord, posting my results on Twitter and getting feedback from that list, until I finally found an engine that I really liked. And I found that for me, the biggest thing was just I was bricking one of my games. I was trying things like fire spread or um, just different types of. I just kind of had these clogged hands, and there's nothing wrong with those kind of decks. It's just for me personally, like let me just go all the way back to basics. I unsleeved like all the cards. Like I just need to draw cards. I need to get energy into the discard and keep drawing up. So I was playing kind of unique cards like Fiery Torch that I found from something called the Weekly Cook-Off that we were talking about, which is discard 1 fire, draw 2. It's like, oh, that works really well with, Magma Basin, with the Arcanine that accelerates from the discard to the bench. I'm just like, I just want to be able to play the game as much as possible because I can't win if I don't play the game. And from losing so much with the deck, I found the weaknesses, which for Fire was that I wasn't taking the first prize very often. So working with Weeder, he was talking about the Tech Ninetales, which for 2 energy snipes 90. So that was great. There was a lightning matchup where I could snipe the eel. There was a dragon matchup where I could snipe the Dragonair, and I had a water matchup where I sniped the Manaphy, and then later cleaned up with a Heatmore. So that kind of just goes into where, honestly, sometimes playing a vanilla consistent list is actually really fun because the process of getting a type to what you believe is to be the best as possible is really rewarding as well.
And that's where I'm at with the majority of my list right now. Like I have a couple. I probably have like 23 decks built and sleeved up right now, and there's probably like 8 that I really really feel good about that I would play. Like if I were to go to like a regionals tomorrow, that I would bring and play. And none of them I would say were really like the meta list. Like I would bring Colossal to one of those lists just because I feel good about where my Colossal list is at. But this is it. This is like kind of what I aspire to be when I look at your Metal Maker list. Like I love everything about it. When we talked about CRC with Jeffrey, and we talked about like the comeback potential, this deck adding in that Caparajah now, like you're forcing your opponent not to be able to bump one of your stadiums, and then they're gonna have to burn their field blower. Well, Metal just has like the best tools, so if they burn their field blower early, which is a way that they can't recover it, like you've won a battle just because of a card that's kind of good on its own. Like obviously 4 energy on Caparajah to do 130 up to 230 is not super great, but that does knock out a Whale Lord like 230 if you need to in a pinch. So like 4 energy isn't impossible for Metal too. You've got Metal Link's Bronzon in there, you've got Raihan, you've got Mela. Like you got Matang that can attach energies too. So like getting to 4 energy in 1 turn is not impossible. It might be improbable, but over the span of like 2 turns, you're looking to do that. So like this list feels good. I got a chance to play against 2 of these lists, like I mentioned earlier on the Twin Lake tournament the other day. This was kind of the best feeling Metal list of the bunch. But I will say, the one thing that always makes me hesitant for Metal, Zamazenta is so good, but it's only good after your opponent has taken a prize. And like when your best card is a little bit deterministic like that, rely on what your opponent's doing, it turns me off to a degree. It's one of the reasons why I'm not a big devolution TM fan either, just because again it requires your opponent to make certain plays. Like it's only good if they decide to play their evolutions. If they think you're a spread deck and they know what you're doing, they can bench around it, put down their big basics. But they're still good cards to run. Like I'm still going to run Devo TM and all my damage spread list because there will be a chance that my grass opponent has to play all of their bench guys out, and then I can get a chance to Devo and take a multi-prize turn. So.
And that's the fun thing with new cards too, because just with talking with you, I was gonna say, well, your first prize comes from Majorization. Now I realize, I cut the Zation to be able to fit in the Cooperaja. So it's like I suspect I might need another basic attacker in here, and that's the fun thing. You can get personalizations too. Like I'm a Battle VIP person. I love Battle VIP Pass. I wanted to hate it, but I kept playing it and it kept being so dang good. But like Jeff, that's probably your Sonya spot. Like to be able to get set up there, or maybe Gloria or something like that. But for me, it's like Gloria is bad on turn 3, so is Battle VIP Pass. It's the same card, except one lets me play it on the first turn and then play Research. And this is funny because this isn't a tech, but this goes into like how kind of boring these lists are. But for me, my fun tech is Hex Maniac. I don't see that in a lot of metal lists, but man, that card can steal games. It's banned and expanded for a reason, people. So it's kind of funny because it's boring, right? Like Hex Maniac, everyone knows is a good card. I don't see it in metal, and that's like one of my fun techs in this is Hex Maniac. But that's like when you get to the competitive side of things, it's sometimes the techs are in the margins. But what I'll say is everything we talked about for the last hour leads to little things like this, where it is those little choices. There's actually a big difference between changing sometimes 2 cards in the deck when you understand the reasoning for them.
And this goes back again to what you said, like when you're the person who built the deck, you know what the card's intent is. And so if you have Zamazenta in the active and you're a player who's not familiar with this list, you might play Hex, not realizing that you've just taken away your extra damage buff. And these are just things that, like, if you're the person who built the list, you know why Hex is in there. You know what it doesn't synergize well with. I can throw this back to a Castella list. Castella was playing Silent Lab in a colorless spread deck that was using kind of the basic draw engines that had popped up, Squovit, Oranguru, the Barrel list. And if you play Silent Lab, turn off your draw engine. But you need to get around bench barrier. And so, you play it at the appropriate time when you feel like it's positive. And again, an inexperienced player with this list, would make mistakes like that. So there is a lot of merit to sitting down, brewing your own list for that exact reason. Know what your cards do. I forget what my cards do all the time though, so I can't even talk.
What's funny, you play a deck so much you forget to read the card, and then you realize, oh wait, this can attach to the active too. But, things like that. And
I mentioned Silent Lab. Silent Lab is the card that kills me the most sometimes. Like I'll play it in every single spread deck, but it never affects me when I'm playing my spread decks. It only affects my opponent. And then all of a sudden I was playing it in grass spread, and I was like, Silent Lab, Bird Keeper up my Rowlet. I'm going to use Rowlet's ability. I was like, oh no.
Yeah, it cooks in fighting too. Like I keep taking Hex Maniac in and out of Hitmons, and I've ultimately just gone with not having it because Okidogi clears, right? And it really Silent Lab and Hex feel so. Silent Lab feels necessary. You have to have like something for that snipe turn, but it stinks when you have those anti-synergistic cards. On the meme side, I was trying to work on a Turbo Curum deck that got the 5 energies, and it's funny because like the consistency was never exactly where I wanted it. And you're just looking at your Silent Lab and your Hex. I'm like, please, I wish I could cut you, but I know I can't. Those cards are so frustrating sometimes for spread. And then for colorless spread, I always just evolve into a Snorlax deck because he's in there. Because it's like sometimes you need to clear the big guy, and then I would find like I'm ignoring these bad cards in my deck, and I'm just Snorlaxing over and over again.
I'm with you there. Like Grass Spread, which is a deck that I've just loved and loved and loved since its inception, kind of does the same thing where like you kind of need Torterra to take over at some point, and then you realize that like Colorless Spread is just a better version of Grass Spread because the Spinda is just a little bit better than the Celebi. The fact that it does damage and confuses is like a big deal when you're trying to stall. So that. Plus, you turn off your Celebi's own ability with Silent Lab, so you lose that stall mechanic. It can be tough. So, Colorless Spread is everything that Grass Spread wants to be because of Snorlax. Because you just Snorlax, or you Ditto that becomes a Snorlax. Like, it's kind of funny. Well, I mean, closing thoughts, Z-Man, about deck building in general?
Yeah, I would say just remember, focus on your strategy. If a card grabs you and you're thinking about it, real quick, spend half an hour, build something. Open up Cardboard Warriors, put in that deck. So let's say, for example, you want to build like the Firecast farm deck. Put it in that. Then think, what stadiums would I want to have? What are the best discard supporters? Then maybe build around the Pokemon. Like you don't have to go Pokemon and then energy. Just build towards the strategy. For brainstorming, remember to be open. Think of all the different ideas. If you think that something is just good and that's how it'll always be, you'll never evolve. Meme it up because that's the enjoyment of the game, and sometimes you'll discover something that other people haven't. And always treasure the community, whether it's the local community that has its own meta, the online one that will help kind of build some generative discussion and ideas, or ultimately the world I live in, which is a blend of both. I'm thankful for Poke Twitter. I'm thankful for Cardboard Warriors, for Tricky Gym, and for all my Maryland locals building this game that I love.
Yeah, couldn't say it better myself. Well, Zach, Z-Man, it's been a pleasure having you on, hearing your thoughts about deck building and what Gym Leader Challenge means to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I like your choice picture. I wonder how many of those will be here by next year.
You caught me.
I suspect two of them. I suspect two of them will still be here. Now, which two? Comment below in Jeff's YouTube section.
Let's get that viewership up. All right. Well, hey everyone, thanks again for checking out Let Loose, the podcast dedicated to all things Gym Leader Challenge. See you guys next time.